Welcome back. Turning now to the Russia investigation and the big bombshell of the week, Michael Cohen's admission that President Trump's involvement in his Moscow Tower project was deeper and lasted much longer than Cohen had testified to Congress about. The guilty plea by President Trump's former lawyer could help us understand some of what we saw in 2016. It could explain why Mr. Trump early on had incentive to embrace Vladimir Putin during the campaign. It could explain why Mr. Trump called for giving Putin relief from sanctions over his annexation of Crimea from Ukraine. And it could explain why the Republican platform was stripped of a proposal to give lethal aid to Ukraine. What it certainly does is place President Trump closer to the center of the investigation of his campaign's ties to Russia. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jerrold Nadler, who will lead the Judiciary Committee in the next Congress. Congressman Nadler, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Good to be here.
Before I get to some of the news of the week, I would like you to reflect a moment. What do you believe the enduring legacy will be of President Bush?
Well, President Bush was a patriot and a good person. I believe his enduring legacy is that he managed from the American end the dissolution of the Soviet Empire. You know, when major empires fall, the most heavily armed empire in the world at that point, usually there's wars and cataclysms associated with it. But I believe the lion's share of the credit for that not happening, for our avoiding cataclysm, is Mikhail Gorbachev, but a major share of that credit also goes to George Bush.
Very well said there. Congressman, I want to start with Michael Cohen. He pled guilty to lying to Congress about the Trump Organization's effort to build a Trump Tower in Moscow back in 2015, 2016. This was happening at the same time that Donald Trump was running for president. Here's what a former federal prosecutor, Ken White, observed in The Atlantic, and I'm curious if you agree. This conclusion, at least, is inescapable. The president, who has followed this drama obsessively, knew that his personal lawyer was lying to Congress about his business activities and stood by while it happened. Do you agree with that assessment? And does that look like obstruction of justice to you?
Well, I do agree with that assessment. And, you know, we have a president who lies incessantly to the American people about big matters and small matters, who surrounds himself with people who lie incessantly to the American people. And the key fact now is that the time when he can get away with lying to the American people all the time and evading accountability is coming to an end. And I do think that this is a very serious matter. And among other things, the fact that he was lying to the American people about doing business in Russia and that the Kremlin knew he was lying gave the Kremlin a hold over him. And one question we have now is, does the Kremlin still have holds over him because of other lies that they know about?
So the fact that the Kremlin, which overnight has confirmed that there were some emails and a phone call between the Trump Organization and the Kremlin, and we only find out about it now, you believe that that is proof that there might be leverage?
There certainly was leverage during the campaign period and until recently, because they knew that he was lying. They knew that he had major business dealings, or that Cohen on his behalf had major business dealings in Moscow during the campaign, and that he was lying about that. There may be other things that they know that give them leverage. One question has always been, why was the president so obsequious to Putin from the beginning of the campaign up to the present day? And it may be that it's because the Kremlin has leverage over the president, which is a terrible thing if true.
Michael Cohen has pled guilty to lying. Why should he be believed now? If he was lying then, why do we know he's credible now? I know it's always tough when you get witnesses that flip, but if he's assisting you in your work in the House Democrats down the road, I assume you hope that he does, how will you know if you can trust him?
Well, I think we'll know a lot more when we see Mr. Mueller's report. He knows a lot more than we do at this point, and the fact that he's been able to show that all these people, whether it's Manafort or Gates or Flynn or Cohen, all the people around the president were lying, I assume means he's got real documentary and other proof of that, and we'll see that in due course.
You have openly talked about holding up the government funding vote until the Muller Protection bill is either a vote is held on it or not. Is that still your current stance? And is that the stance you want Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer to take?
Well, my current stance, and I think our stance generally, is that we must do whatever we can to protect the Mueller investigation from interference by the president. We are dependent on that investigation to get to the bottom of the corruption in the campaign, of the Russian role in the campaign, of the Trump campaign, or the president's role in colluding with the Russians if he did. We know his campaign did. The question is, did he personally? So we have to do whatever we can to protect that investigation.
Very quickly, former FBI Director James Comey has been subpoenaed to appear before your committee. Right now, you're ranking member there. He's fighting the subpoena. He wants to do it. He would voluntarily do it in public, on the record. Chairman Goodlatte has said he would provide a transcript within 24 hours, videotape it, but not have it live. Is that enough for you?
No. The Republicans in this particular investigation have a history of having these in-camera interviews and then selectively leaking portions of the interview to give distorted view to the public of what happened. Let Comey testify in public. There's no military secrets here. He wants to testify. He ought to be able to. We ought to have accountability and openness to the American public, and there's no reason for the secrecy that Mr. Goodlatte wants.
All right, Congressman Nadler, the ranking Democrat now in Judiciary, soon to be Chairman of Judiciary. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views, sir. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.